I turned and cried, they have murdered Henry Joy.
And good afternoon, and welcome to Radio Free Eireann on the final Saturday of the Fun Drive, the Summer Offensive. And that was the one and only Joe Banjo Burke. And when they say you'll not see the likes of him again, you can truly hear it in his voice. There's very few people that sing like that of Henry Joy McCracken, a proud Ulsterman. We want to state today that our show, Radio Free Eireann, is in the archives from 12 to 1 o'clock, and the show after us is Science, Health, and Healing. That's the next show. So if you want to hear the second half of the show, we're on for 2 hours today, and a lot of people did not hear some of the show on the archives. You just have to go to the next show, and we'll make this announcement again before 2 o'clock to let you know that we'll be switching over on the archives to Science, Health, and Healing. Now, if anybody was reading the newspapers, there was a few stories about our guest from last week, Jerry McGill, a lifelong Irish Republican who spent time in jails in Germany, in this country. He was a guest 20 years ago when he was out on bail before he went to jail. And some of the papers were writing about the interview we did with Jerry McGill. And here are some of the headlines. McGill's language vile. Former Assembly candidate Jerry McGill calls Catholic judges traitors. Radio host clarifies McGill's collaborative threat to the judiciary. Republican claims Catholic judiciary will be dealt with. McGill's disturbing threats. McGill's threat to judges to be deplored. Hussey condemns disgraceful comments. And I just got this in. Now, those are from the Irish Times. the newsletter in Belfast and the Belfast Telegraph, and this just came in from the Irish Post, which would be considered the Irish echo of London and England. Republican Jerry McGill calls out pathetic old shinners in explosive U.S. radio interview. Prominent Tyrone Republican Jerry McGill is known for his strong views, and when he was interviewed on WBAI's New York Radio Free Eireann last week, he didn't hold back. And they have clips to the transcript of last week's show. We're talking about the effect Jerry's free speech on New York radio could be affecting his life very shortly. Charges are being filed against Jerry McGill. There's talk about revoking his license. Jerry was charged and sentenced to 2 years under the Good Friday Agreement for being a member of the IRA in 1976. Jerry Adams will never have to worry about that charge being against him because Jerry Adams claims he was never in the IRA. So based on an interview that Jerry McGill gave in New York, he is being brought up on charges. And Martin, you were brought on to BBC Ulster. You did a radio show to talk about the interview. But what exactly is happening from Jerry McGill, and how serious now are the charges that are being brought against him based on an interview he did here in New York?
John, first of all, charges are not being filed, should not be filed, and hopefully will not be filed. What happened is that a number of people, particularly that song we played at the beginning about Henry Joy McCracken, that goes out to the Belfast newsletter. The Belfast newsletter is one of the daily newspapers in the north of Ireland, particularly in Belfast. It would be considered a hardline Unionist orange paper as compared with a much more moderate Unionist paper, which is still fairly hardline to some of our viewpoints, the Belfast Telegraph. And, of course, there's a nationalist paper, the Irish News. The founding family of that paper, the newsletter, was the Joy family. And if you listen to that song, Henry Joy McCracken was a member of that family, the famous Joy family, and his family was involved with founding the newspaper. And Henry Joy McCracken was a great Irish patriot. That connection, that political affiliation has changed very greatly down the years. So now we have the paper newsletter, which is very hardline in terms of orange sentiments, which would probably not complain if sentiments of a similar nature were introduced or put forward by orange spokesmen at bonfires or marches, such as that happening in Derry today at the Apprentice Boys. All right, they picked up Jerry McGill's interview. They took one line out of that interview and used that to try and say that he was threatening Catholic members, nationalist members of the judiciary or of lawyers. And that was completely nonsense, completely untrue, completely inaccurate. Members, listeners will have heard Jerry McGill's interview last week. If you didn't hear it, it's up on rfe123.org. That's rfe123.org. And I want to congratulate our transcriber. That transcriber, I can't say he or she because this person's completely anonymous, has done a tremendous job. You not only can listen to or read that transcript in writing, but you can play a radio interview that I got stuck doing for BBC Talkback last week about Jerry McGill. And what they did is, Jerry McGill, during a 20-minute interview, he was talking about Brexit, the withdrawal, attending to withdraw from the European community, and the devastating effects that would have on Ireland. He was talking about Tyrone, his own county, and the fact that 6 of the 9 counties of Ulster are cut off, and they're denied their rightful place as set forth in 1916 and elsewhere to be part of a free and independent 32-county Irish nation that governs Ireland in Irish interests rather than in British interests from London at Westminster. And he talked about that. He talked about praise for new movements, in effect, a new wave that was shown with the vote against on Brexit that was shown stirring a yearning for national freedom. He talked about the example in Scotland. He said if Scotland moves towards independence, that would be a further inspiration for political change and getting back to a united Ireland. He talked about all those things, and in it, he talked about his own political case. Now, Jerry McGill was charged in 1981, for an incident that happened in 1981. He was arrested in 2007 after a political campaign in which he had expressed opposition to support for the renamed Royal Ulster Constabulary, the police service of Northern Ireland. He had expressed opposition to a situation in which dip-block courts were going to be used and which people would give credibility, from nationalists would give credibility to these courts and not try to use them for justice, to really abolish dip-block courts, the non-jury courts. And he talked about the attitudes of some people who get positions within those courts. And when Jerry McGill was on trial for something that happened in 1981, when he was brought to trial just a few years ago, so many years later, he said there was an attitude that people who opposed British rule was somehow a bad character. They were looked down upon, that they were somehow a bad character. That's the phrase he used. And meanwhile, there was an administration in which people involved, as we mentioned in that BBC Talkback radio program, were involved in the same campaign, had leading roles in that campaign. People who Jerry and we would agree and say that that campaign, which ended so long ago before the Good Friday Agreement, was a legitimate campaign, a legitimate fight for freedom. But the conditions that would make conflict legitimate today no longer exist, haven't existed for some time. And Jerry simply said that they are serving English interests, that he differentiated between what was happening, unionists living in the north of Ireland, and English interests at Westminster, a government that serves English interests at Westminster. That was completely taken out of context. Those words was completely deliberately misconstrued by people who never wanted to see Jerry get out of jail in the first place, who were against him getting any sort of justice or free speech or views or running for election or anything like that. People like Nelson McCausland, who would be associated, we heard Seamus Delaney talk about the type of bigotry that one hears around the Orange Pond fires or demonstrations on July the 12th, or hearing today in the Apprentice Boys in Derry. Nelson McCausland is a member of the DUP, Ian Paisley's party that he founded, which would be very much associated with the Belfast Newsletter, very much associated with that sort of ideology. And they pulled that and tried to say that Jerry McGill was somehow involved with threatening people, and that is not true, and that is definitely wrong, and we hope that there will be no charges, no lifting of his license, because it would totally unjust, untrue, but inaccurate.
Was something filed? I mean, in the lawyer's statement there at the very beginning.
What has happened is there is an existing appeal against Jerry's old conviction. And what his solicitor, Aidan Collins, says is that our client stood for election in 2007 on a manifesto for freedom, justice, and peace. The interviews he gave to a United States radio station should be listened to in its entirety. They cover a plurality of subjects, including Irish and Scottish history, poetry, prison memories, the ancient order of Hibernians, 9/11, and Brexit. And our client has always maintained his innocence and is working closely with his lawyers to assist. So they're trying to appeal that. And then all of a sudden, these articles, hysterical articles, appear in the Belfast Newsletter. Now, I don't know too many articles in the Belfast Newsletter which would be worried about nationalist members of the judiciary or nationalist members of nationalist lawyers. And these articles were brought up just to have an improper, unfair manipulation, misconstruction of Jerry McGill's words and try and bring charges against him and take away his license. He's out on license for that earliest case, and they can do that very easily and do it without any real charge.
But, Martin, this is all part of the British strategy that they've brought in if you're against the peace process and did time in Long Kesh, you do not get a visa. If you support Jerry Adams, no matter how much time you did in jail, you get a visa. Now, bail restrictions on Republicans getting out of jail. They can't do interviews or associate with other Republicans. And speech is taken very seriously in the 6 counties. And Martin, you were a victim of that. You gave a speech, I believe, in County Tyrone, and Margaret Thatcher banned you from going to that part of Ireland.
Well, actually, I gave the speech for somebody else, one of Henry Joy McCracken's fellow Republican leaders in 1798. They were unveiling a memorial to Roddy McCorley, and I happened to be driving through the area with Danny Morrison, and we were there. We came over, and they asked us to say a few words. So I gave a speech. And it was a night after attending a funeral for somebody, a Republican killed in Derry, member of the English family. 2 young members of that family were killed, and at separate incidents. And I know the father. I had met him and went to pay my respects at the funeral. And coming back, we were asked to give a short speech. So that was fine. That was at one point. I believe it was in April, because I was over for an Easter commemoration in Tyrone. Months later, when I was intending to lead a tour back to the north of Ireland in August of 1984, all of a sudden, Peter Robinson and the DUP said I should be banned because of the speech I gave months before. And, of course, I was banned at that time. And when I was invited by Republicans to attend a rally in Belfast in 1984, and, John, you were at that rally, the rally was attacked. We just were involved in civil disobedience. One young man, John Downs, was killed. The RUC drove into that rally, fired plastic bullets, attacked people, drove in with Land Rovers, killed John Downs. And this year, when they're having the Internment Day rally, it actually started from the spot where John Downs was killed. But that's how serious they take it. We're concerned. Jerry McGill, his real problem is that he stood up. He said basically that the Stormont deal in terms of a united Ireland, which we were promised, is not working. Even the other day, unionist politicians who would not attend the funeral of Bishop Daly, who is a man of peace, very highly respected. And again, there is efforts, there are sorry initiatives, there are apologies, working together in Stormont to do away with the injustices, all of those things, the outreach, the reconciliation that is supposed to, or was supposed to, get unionists to support a united Ireland or feel at home in a united Ireland. None of that has happened. And what Jerry McGill was saying, it's getting more nationalists comfortable or saying that British rule is not so bad for me.
And you listen to WBAI, and
but
good thing.
That's not to say that they should be in any way under threat, except politically we want to work towards a united
Why do you have
Ireland.
to clarify that? There's nobody listening to BAI.
Well, John,
No, there's nobody out there listening.
I was asked on that
what
BBC radio, I got asked a number of questions. Could you explain what happened and how Jerry got to that? And about 2 lines into the explanation of that 20-minute interview, said, let's get to the point. Let's just get to these words. And over again. And I was asked, somebody said, I'm an Ulsterman. Don't I have a right to be here? And I said, yeah, and how about the people in Donegal or Cavan or Monaghan? Don't they have a right as Ulstermen, a say about the future of their country, or people from the 26 counties? Why should you get a veto on having one Ireland, one vote? Things like that shock people. And then I said, yeah, if Jerry McGill knew how badly his words would be misconstrued and taken out of context, and Jerry McGill's words wouldn't have gotten to anybody who was a nationalist or anybody who, the audience, that they were afraid about threatening members of the judiciary with a political movement to a united Ireland, except it was carried in the newsletter over and over again, except it's been carried in papers since. But Jerry McGill, what I said was, if he knew how badly his words would be deliberately misconstrued, deliberately misused, and used to claim that he was saying something about some kind of threat when all he was talking about was working politically for United Ireland, certainly as something every right to do, he would have changed those words and not given him the opportunity.
So there we are, trying to clarify what happened last week. And you wouldn't believe the amount of coverage over in Ireland this got, from Dublin to Belfast and now over to London. And it just shows you the value of this station. And we're in fundraising mode. And the number here is 516-620-3602. we're using the DVD of Liam Ryan, who was an American citizen, went back to County Tyrone and was assassinated by Loyalist Death Squad. And also, we have the 20th anniversary of Angela's Ashes, the hardback book that's going to be signed by Malachi, because as Malachi McCourt informed me that Frank is dead, so he would have to do it himself. So the book is $100 and the DVD is $75, but what we want to do also, the value of this show, is the announcements we make of things that are coming up. So we're going to do that, and then we'll talk about some of the premiums, but at any stage you can call up 516-620-3602 and donate to the station. During the week, I went to the Irish Repertory Theater on 22nd Street and saw a play called Quietly. Now, next Wednesday, I am back on the air with Corey Kilgannon and Malachi McCourt from 10 to 3, and we're hoping to have on one of the actors. It's set in a Belfast bar and recounting a bombing that happened in 1973, a very powerful play. Hope to have one of the actors on. I recommend go down and see it. It's been extended, so get there and see it. Also, the play that I've written, Cabdivus, is in the Fringe Festival, and for me it starts tomorrow at the Soho Playhouse at 15 Van Dam Street at 8:45 tomorrow, and I have 5 shows. If you go to fringenyc.org or cabdivus.com, CABTIVIST.com, and I'd like to thank Variety Magazine. Out of the 200 plays that are in the Fringe Festival, they picked 10, and they said Cabdivus was one of the plays to see because there's a buzz about it. Well, in order for there to be a buzz, I need people buzzing down to the theater at the Soho Playhouse, so I have 5 shows. They're getting towards selling out, but you have to go to fringenyc.org or cabdivus.com and go and see that. And with us, we have in the studio, Jimmy Sullivan seems to be a regular. I don't know how these things happen, but people just appear. And Jimmy's a retired fireman, and he's been with us since Rocky Sullivan's over here. And unfortunately, he has what's being termed now is the 9/11 lung, is it called, Jimmy? Or
yes, I have lung and reflux. I have the lung and reflux.
Yeah, and days like this are very tough, and he's on steroids to even come up the stairs here. Is gone are the days of Jerry running into houses on fire and with 200 pounds of equipment on him to drag people out. Now just has a trouble just on his own, being that he was down there at 9/11 for what, the whole 6 months?
I was there for a month. I was already retired. I was out when the spinal injury, and I went back in. I went to my old firehouse, and I went in. We lost our rigs there. I got there the 12th. I wasn't there actually at the collapse, but I got there the 12th, the morning of the 12th, and stayed there a month. Yeah. So I caught the big stuff.
Yeah. Not only that, you're going to be talking about another disaster, the Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah, this is a problem that's going on now with the New York City and their stooge company, Build It Back, over in Gerritsen Beach. And everybody knows Gerritsen Beach is the home of the only Hibernian Hall in New York. But there's 200 houses being worked on since last October, and none completed. Families were told that the job would be completed in 5 or 6 months, and they were given $4,000 for moving and storage of household goods. It's already costing about $6,000 and no end in sight. We need help for these people devastated by the hurricane. So if anybody knows anybody that can do anything about it to spur these people on, to start getting these people back in, contact me at jim@brooklynirish.com. That's jim@brooklynirish.com, and Brooklyn Irish is one word. And we can help the people that are they're really in dire straits. My son being one of them. He has a daughter going off to college this year, and another one going to senior year in St. Xavier's High School here in Brooklyn. But there's no end in sight. They locked him out. They changed the locks on his house. They told him he's not allowed in his house. And not just him, but the other families, too. They're not allowed to watch the progress. And there's no work been done there for about the past 3 weeks, my son has told me. I want to give a little bit more up note here. It happened in Brooklyn. I remember the opening song was stating being against the Redcoats. Well, starting next Saturday, we'll be on air, but it starts at 11 o'clock next Saturday, the beginning of the Battle of Brooklyn Week. And that's going to be held for the annual 400 the Maryland 400 commemoration, and these are 400 Maryland Irishmen that came up to fight the Brits in Brooklyn in the War of Independence in 1776. And the ceremony is going to take place at 11 o'clock at the Michael Rowley American League Post on 9th Street between 3rd and 4th Avenue here in Brooklyn, followed by a memorial march to the Old Stone House, which is the actual battle site where they fought with the Brits, led by a lone bagpiper, and followed by a ceremony and wreath laying. After that, later on that day, at the Holy Name Church on 245 Prospect Park West, there's going to be a mass for Our Lady of Knock. As everybody knows, she's the Queen of Ireland. And there's going to be a mass there at 5:30 again, followed by rose laying and a memorial. Tuesday night, out in Bay Ridge, is the Irish Night on Shore Road at 7 o'clock. And that's going to be at Shore Road and 79th Street, the concert with the Canny Brothers and Clan Aaron Band. Kings County, AOH, and LAOH will have a recruitment tent there. So anybody who wants to join the AOH and fight the Brits from within here, within Brooklyn, please do it. And Brooklyn AOH is coordinated a brotherhood with County Tyrone AOH with Jerry McKeough. Because when Jerry McKeough was actually in New York in the early 90s, he actually joined Division 35 here in Brooklyn. So we kind of hooked up with their county. He's the president of County Tyrone AOH, so we hooked up with him. So we're fighting for him, too, here. So if you want to join the AOH, come fight with us, with Jerry, against the Brits in the North.
And, of course, Jim means politically. We don't want to...
but no one's listening.
No, yes, no, only politically.
On a more serious note, look, first of all, I did speak to the family of Liam Ryan in Tyrone, and they were very grateful for the support last week. This DVD, it's tremendous. It tells his whole story, what it's like growing up in Tyrone, what it was like coming to America. There's scenes from me and Brendan Stack and others, scenes from Gaelic Park, then going back. You had people like Brian Arthur's very well-known Republican, speaking about what was happening where people were assassinated in the north of Ireland just because they were family members of Republicans. And Jerry McGill, we asked him about that last week. That didn't seem to bother anybody in the Belfast newsletter or anybody else in the radio interview. That was accepted. But if you want that DVD, if you want to help the station, if you want us to be on the air so we can have voices like Jerry McGill's, like Richard O'Rourke's, like the other voices you hear here, the other arguments, the case you make for Irish national self-determination, for one Ireland, one vote, for the indefeasible right of the Irish people to national freedom, call 516-620-3602. That's 516-620-3602. Ask him for the Liam Ryan DVD. And if you do that, you pledge $75, you can not only enjoy that DVD, but you're standing up, you're fighting for free speech, politically, in that way with your contribution. I do also want to mention, again, our website is tremendous. You can get everything. You can get a transcript of the interview. How many times I got cut off per sentence with the BBC. That's at RFE, Radio Free Eireann, RFE123.org, RFE123.org. Go to that website and use it. I want to congratulate David Tubiolo. He ran for election in the Westchester area. He won. He's been a great friend of the Irish in the Woodlawn area. He won. And again, people asked me after I mentioned last week, we'll have a special event in October 16th in Woodlawn for the Ancient Order of Hibernians. And the deportees, the Irish political deportees, are going to be reunited and honored as part of that event. We will have tickets shortly, but it's a few months away. Check back to this program for information, but that's going to be a great afternoon, 3 to 7 p.m. at 236th Street and Katona Avenue in Woodlawn. All right, we have a guest coming up. Francie McGuigan is going to be talking just in a few minutes, so we're going to try, please, call, pledge, 516-620-3602. Francie McGuigan, there was a demonstration last week, an internment day rally, and unlike the Apprentice Boys today, they were not allowed to go to the city center. They were stopped before reaching it. And Francie is also one of the hooded men who have a torture case against the British government. He's going to talk about that, about what it was like to be one of the first internees, and why people are still marching against internment so many years after August 1971.
And one final announcement. Father Pat Maloney, the saint of the Lower East Side, is in a major article in the New York Times today. Father Pat Maloney went to jail over a Brinks job up in Rochester, New York. $7 million was taken. $2 million of it was brought back to Manhattan, and $5 million are still missing. There's going to be a movie made about it, and the story's about the movie. So Father Pat will be on next Wednesday on WBAI between 10 and 12, and next Saturday we will have Father Pat on. It's going to be in the print edition tomorrow, but if you go to the New York Times right now, go to the New York section, and you'll see the Brinks job, the movie. It's a very good article by Corey Kilgannon, and this is going to be a major motion picture, and there's talks of Sean Penn and Martin Sheen and all sorts of big names are being dropped about it, but it's a fascinating story of how Father Pat Maloney got caught up in armed car robbery up in Rochester, and how the money made it down here, and it had to do with an Irish-American cop in Rochester, an Irish Republican in Queens, and you have an Irish priest in the Lower East Side. If that doesn't smell like a movie, I don't know what does. So we'll be talking to Father Pat on Wednesday and next Saturday. Now, what do you want to play a clip now and go to the guest, or how do you want to do it?
We can play one clip of the DVD. The guest, Francie McGuigan, is not involved with the DVD, although he was present at the commemoration. But I think the first clip is a poem that actually is recited. It doesn't do justice playing it on the radio. The DVD shows all the films, that beautiful area, on Loch Ness, the Battery Bar in County Tyrone, and a poem was made about the killing of Liam Ryan as he closed the bar which he bought with money that he earned here as an American citizen, working for Con Ed, saved up, went home, married, had a son, and the poem is about what happened that night.
Hush in the stilly autumn night, as the frost creeps o'er the ground, and Loch Ness waters laps the shore with its so familiar sound. Along the bay the wild ducks play, and the swan she guards her young. Across the sky I heard the cry of a grieving widow's tongue. 1 hour before the gunshot roar disturbed the peaceful night, 2 men lay dead, both riddled with lead, for a cause neither just nor right. Down the shore not far at the Battery Bar, while young lads threw their darts, as a lion stalks her prey, cruel murderers lay, with vengeance in their hearts. So hush was the murderers' footsteps as they walked up to the door. How many notches in your gun now, as you count your latest score? As the door opened wide, there stood inside one of Ireland's bravest sons. He would not retreat, his death he'd meet, as he stared gamely down your guns. For Liam Ryan knew his life was through, for Ireland he would die. I heard women pray and old men say, I wonder who or why.
Friendly game of darts at the pub called the Battery when there was a knock on the door. As publican Liam Ryan opened the door, 2 gunmen burst in and sprayed the bar with bullets.
And that is the very start of the DVD. If you call 516-620-3602, that's 516-620-3602, you ask for the Liam Ryan DVD, and I don't know if it's listed within Radio Free Eireann or if it's listed separately, but we're told it is registered. You can keep us on the air. You can keep us, show this station how much support we have in the Irish community and those who are just interested in events that relate to the Irish community. You can have voices like Jerry McGill, like Richard O'Ra was on last week, like our upcoming guest, Francie McGuigan, and journalist Eamon Sweeney, who'll be on in the second hour between 1 and 2. Francie McGuigan is going to be coming up in a second to talk about the internment rally of last week and just the history of internment. He was one of its early victims. So we're going to be going, but please call 516-620-3602. Say you want the Liam Ryan video. Believe me, I've always been inspired by people like Liam, what they went through growing up under British rule, what life was like for them, why they want freedom and justice, and their his life, the lives of other people like that, is the thing that kept me going at all times. All right, we have our guest on the line, Francie. We're talking to Francie McGuigan. Francie, I'm sorry we're a few minutes late coming to you. How are you today in Belfast?
I'm grand, thank God.
Francie, you've had more than most experience in terms with internment day rallies. Last week, there was an internment day rally in Belfast, and I saw your picture in the Irish News. You were asked to be a supporter or sponsor of that rally as a veteran Republican. You, Ivor Bell. I saw some other photographs that I recognized in the Irish News. How did that come about that you were asked to be a supporter or a formal supporter of that rally?
Because I myself have been interned, and not only that, 6 members of my family have been interned. In fact, my father was interned on 3 separate occasions, so I am very much against internment. And always have been. I suffered it as a child with my father being arrested and interned.
All right, now, Francie...
So I had no hesitation whatsoever. I've attended all the anti-internment marches that have been in Belfast for the past 4 years. For the last 2 years now, we've been blocked from entering into the centre of Belfast. It seems it's okay for the Orange Order and that they enter the centre of Belfast, but not for Republicans. It's still... This talk about a shared future still has yet to arrive.
Well, Francie, we're talking with Francie McGuigan, who was one of the original hooded men but from Belfast. Francie, some people would ask, why an internment day rally? They say that internment, where you were interned in 1971, and we'll get to that in a bit, no longer exists in that form. But internment, correct me if I'm wrong, the internment day rallies have always gone to the heart. Internment was such an injustice under British rule, and not only internment, but what happened to you, that it seemed to summarize all of the injustices of British rule, and that was the thing that was used as an occasion, the Sunday closest to August the 9th, to highlight injustice, to go back to the streets of Belfast. Tell us what injustices that you were highlighting last week as you and others attempted to march from the city centre.
Well, I'll give you a few examples. For instance, in the north of Ireland today, we don't have the RUC, we have the PSNI. Name change. Long Cash, when we were in it, we went to sleep one night in Long Cash. We're told the following morning, it's no longer Long Cash, it's Your Majesty's Prison Amaze. We were told we are no longer internees, you're now detainees. They changed the name. And today the practice is remandees. They take you in, they put you in a charge, they hold you in prison for a year or 2 years. They then offer you extreme bail conditions. Don't live within 40 miles of your own home. Don't visit such. Don't speak to such and such a person. You're not allowed to attend parades or commemorations. So it's another form of internment. And the same as they've done all along. They've changed the names. They just they adjust the thing just so that the Brits get their own way in Ireland and still have the heavy hand down on Irish Republicans.
Francie, we're talking with Francie McGuigan. I can remember years ago being at a demonstration against what was called internment by remand. And the person who was interned at that stage was Cherry Adams, and I believe he was in for about 8 or 9 months before they announced that there was no real evidence against him and he was released. But now there have been people who have been interned by remand in that fashion, simply deny them bail. They're presumed innocent, but yet they're said we can't give them bail because they might reoffend, commit a second offense, although they're presumed innocent of any offense. They can be in jail, in prison for much longer. What sort of periods are we talking about for internment by remand?
You're talking 2-3 years. You know, and then after 3 years, there's been 6 or 7 cases now where somebody's been remanded in custody on a charge. When the charge actually appears in court, the day it appears in court, the charges are withdrawn and the person is released. But they've just spent 3 years in prison, always pleading not guilty to any charge, but still refused bail. In fact, this week, MI5 has come out and recommended to judges that they don't grant, what they classify dissident Republicans, don't grant them bail. You know, this is MI5 interfering in the judicial system here in Ireland. They've always done that.
And another form of internment that I've heard used, or another phrase, is internment by license, where someone, and there's an example, I think there was a demonstration in Derry, and he was one of the people, I believe, who was highlighted in your march, named Tony Taylor. Could you tell us?
Tony, that's right.
Could you explain what happened to him?
Tony had been released under license and was rearrested and put up on a charge, was acquitted on the charge, but was returned back to McGabry prison again under license. So he's in there now. He's appeared in court. The charges were withdrawn, but he's returned to prison under license. They have not put any charge against him. They have not given him a release date, so he's just... They can call it whatever they like. They can call it a license if they want. But as far as I'm concerned, it's internment. It's imprisonment without trial. You know, and this is from the country that's supposed to give us the Magna Carta, the great principles of freedom and all that. They have just, for 800 years, they have sat on top of the Irish people. Go back to internment. It's gone back to when Strongbow first came to Ireland. The first notable case of internment, from my recollection now, is back 1803. Anne Devlin, who was an associate of Robert Emmet. She was imprisoned for 3.5 years in a cell 3 feet wide, 14 feet long, and straw on the floor. Not only was she imprisoned, but her entire family were imprisoned. She had a 14-year-old brother who died in prison. I know I'm going back over the years, but this practice still goes on in my country today by a foreign government.
All right, what happened last Sunday? You wanted to highlight those injustices. I know the committee had applied for all the permits that they would need to march. And just once, I believe the place that they marched from was actually the place where John Downes was killed at the internment rally in 1984 by the RUC, and that's the place where they really attacked a rally simply because I was introduced by Jerry Adams as one of the speakers. Is that correct?
John Downes was murdered there. They shot him he was 3 feet from an RUC police officer who fired and hit him in the chest with a rubber bullet. He was murdered. You know, and our march was into the centre of Belfast. We'd applied. We gave all the reasons we were getting in. We told them exactly how we were doing it, too many people to be involved, too many bands to be playing. We gave them all that information, and they told us, no, you can't. One of the reasons, by the way, in their definition is the fact that the Anti-Internment League does not support the Good Friday Agreement. As far as I know, the Orange Order does not support the Good Friday Agreement. The DUP did not support the Good Friday Agreement, but yet withal they can freely march in. In fact, the previous Saturday, the Loyalist flag protesters went into the centre of Belfast and stood outside the City Hall opposing a gay pride parade, you know. So they have freedom for the whole city of Belfast, but yet with all Republicans are confined within our own ghetto areas. We were allowed down the Falls Road. They stopped us at the bottom of Divis Street and Barrack Street and told us we could go no further. So we held our commemoration there and peacefully dispersed. The previous year they stopped us in the Old Park Road. The reason they stopped us, they said we were going into Belfast at a busy shopping time, which was on a Sunday at 1 o'clock, and we were going in, and it would upset trade in the centre of Belfast, so they blocked us in the Old Park Road. And again we held our commemoration and dispersed again. They just will not permit Republicans into the centre of Belfast.
All right, now...
You know, they brand us all as dissident Republicans. I'm a Republican. I'm also a dissident because I dissent from British rule in Ireland. That makes me a dissident. You know, so
well, Francie,
this thing of the shared future does not exist.
We keep hearing about all the influence that Sinn Féin has in the new administration and nationalists have in the new administration. Why is it that this influence can't be used to at least give members of their own community the right to march into the center of Belfast and highlight injustices that are being used by the administration which they represent against fellow nationalists and Republicans?
They pay some lip service to it, and the fact that one of their elected representatives said they should be allowed into the centre of Belfast. Not one member of Sinn Féin has ever turned up at any of the anti-internment marches. They have got to a situation now where they have cosy jobs. They have it all nice and handy. They're on good wages now and good salaries, great expenses, and they have lost the ideal of republicanism. They've lost the aim of republicanism. They have no longer follow the path of republicanism. They've stepped out. They're part of the system now. They are employed by a British government to administer rule here in the occupied 6 counties.
You're listening to Radio Free. Eireann was speaking with Francie McGuigan, talking about an internment march that sort of happened last Saturday. Francie, I want to talk about the strategy of the British, and they've learned well over the years during the Troubles that you could have done time in Long Kesh and support the peace process and get a visa to come to New York. If you did time in Long Kesh and you didn't support it, you can't get that. Part of bail restrictions right now are that you cannot do any interviews while you're out on bail, and you have to watch who you're associating with. And I feel like I'm a member of the RUC or PSNI. I have to give you a warning. Really watch what you're saying here, because after what happened last week with Jerry McGill, that you speaking to an audience 3,000 miles away, you could be brought up on charges in the 6 counties, which is now getting so bizarre that not only do they not want you speaking in the 6 counties without being brought up in charges, but you cannot speak anywhere else in the world via television or the phone.
No, they prefer we just all go away now, but unfortunately, we are not going anywhere. As somebody once said, we ain't going away.
All right, Francie.
We're still here today. We're Republicans. I've been a Republican all my life. I've been a Republican activist all my life. And I say I dissent from Britain's rule in Ireland. Unfortunately, Sinn Féin and their associates have now accepted that position. They accept the status quo that Britain has a right in Ireland.
Okay. Francie, we want to just talk a little bit, explain to our audience a little bit about what happened, why internment is such an emotional day. Internment, of course, meant you could be picked up and held for as long as the British wanted to hold you. But there was a lot more than that. You were arrested at the beginning in August 9th of 1971, and you became one of what was called the Hooded Men. Could you tell us what happened that morning?
Well, I was arrested on the 9th of August on the internment roundup, and was held for the first 48 hours in Girtwood Barrack, went through the usual in and out for interrogation, back, threatened, punched, battered. They took boys out, put them into the helicopter, lifted the helicopter up, spun it around a few times, and then threw the boys out backwards. But the helicopter was only 2 feet out of the ground. Now, this went on constantly for the first 48 hours. When the 48 hours were up, they were starting to transfer the men into Crumlin Road prison to bring them in for internment. In my case, they came to me, they bypassed me and took the lads at the end of the lane along with me. They emptied the hall and left 2 people sitting in the hall, myself and a lad called Joe Clark. I was then dragged out by a military policeman. When I was arrested and taken out of the house, I had only a pair of trousers on. I didn't get no underwear, vest, shoes, socks. So I was actually stripped naked by him, and he had himself photographed holding me by the hair. I was then taken up and brought into a room, kept there for about an hour with the military police and RUC, and I actually at that stage could hear the bombing and shooting going on outside. I was then gripped, taken up, handcuffed behind my back, and a hood placed over my head, and dragged out and placed into a helicopter, handcuffed to 3 other lads that were there with us. The helicopter then flew, we don't know, we think somewhere in the region of 40 to 50 minutes. I was then, the doors opened in the helicopter. I was handcuffed to Kevin Hanaway. The handcuffs were taken off. I was handcuffed behind my back and then thrown out of the helicopter. Again, at this stage, I did not know how far off the ground I was, because in the other cases, it only lasted 3-4 minutes. And this occasion, when I'm in the air, so I thought this was the end. I actually hit the ground, picked up, dragged in. The hood was pulled off my head, and there standing in front of me was a man with a white coat on and a stethoscope around his neck. I got the impression he was a doctor. He gave me a 30-minute medical examination and then nodded.
That meant you were fit for more torture?
This was the start of it. The hood was then replaced. I was stripped of the trousers, put in the boiler suit that was 4 or 5 sizes too big, Thankfully, in my case, it was too big. Some of the boys got set that was 4 or 5 sizes too small. I was then taken, dragged into a room, placed against the wall, fingertips and toes, legs wide apart, and this high, piercing noise was there. I attempted to come off the wall, received such an awful battering and kicking, placed back against the wall, and this proceeded for the first half hour, where I then refused to stand against the wall, kept battered, physically dragged back up against the wall, and this went on indefinitely for, we can't put a period of time on it. But the next thing I remember was being dragged along a corridor, brought in to an interrogation room, and this was the old-style film stepped, bright lights shining in my face, and the hood was taken off, my hands were handcuffed behind my back, and I was accused of everything that ever happened in the north of Ireland. They then wanted to know who's in the IRA, who do you know that's in the IRA, who does your father talk to, who calls to see your mother, did you ever see guns? They went over all this. And again, I refused to answer questions for them. I kept asking why this was going on and told them I wanted to use the toilet, and they told me no. So for the next 7 days, this boiler suit that I had on became my day clothes, my night clothes, and my toilet. And this applied to, there was 14 of us went through this. You were then dragged back out, put up against the wall again, and this piercing noise coming through constantly. It seemed to go in through your hair and your head, down through your body, out through your toes, and it seemed to touch every nerve and sinew in the body. And each time you tried to come off that wall, you were battered. So you just roll up and into the ball and get a merciful kicking. I then came to handcuffed to a cast iron radiator with a hood on, lying on a concrete floor. In this room, there was no noise, but the cold in this room was unbelievable. You're lying on the concrete floor. The next thing, the door burst open, and I was kicked and thumped and told, you were told not to sleep, you were told not to sleep. And that was just it for 7 days. You were either up against the wall with the noise, in the room lying on the concrete floor, handcuffed to a cast iron radiator, or else you were in for interrogation. Now, the interrogation, as I say, consisted of this physical abuse. Somebody behind would swing in the handcuffs. He'd slap his 2 hands against your ears simultaneously, and with times they'd grip you by the back of the hair and smash your head against the table. And they then, on one occasion, I remember, they asked me, you start off each interrogation to have your name and address. So I give them my name, my address. They asked me to spell my name. I could spell the Francie part all right, but couldn't spell McGuigan. I kept making a mistake. Didn't know what the mistake was, but I knew it was wrong. And I kept trying to do this, which they found very humorous and had a great laugh at this. And then told me, it's all right, we know how to spell it. But just to be on the safe side for yourself, try counting up to 10, Francie. And I wouldn't attempt to count to 10 in case I couldn't make it. At this stage, I thought I was losing my mind. I was actually convinced that my mind had cracked where I couldn't spell my own name. On another occasion, when I told them I lived in Jamaica Street, they said, oh, Jamaica Street, yes. We believe there was a massive bomb explosion in Jamaica Street, and there are 70-odd people killed in it. We hope your family's all safe. You know, this was the sort of thing that went on.
Right, and that was not true. Nothing like that had ever happened. Francie, how long was it before you were transferred from this type of treatment? And again, all this, there are no charges against you. You were never charged with anything. They just picked you up at random. How long was it before you were transferred to Crumlin Road or another prison?
9 days in total. During that period, I lost 21 pounds in weight, and I was no heavyweight going in. I think I was 11 stone, and come out to just something over 9 stone. So that whole thing, and that went on to 14 of us. We were then, as I say, transferred back to Crumlin Road Prison and then to Long Cash. Now, some of the boys spent as long as 4.5 years in there 2 of the hooded men spent 4.5 years. A couple of the hooded men were released, but rearrested and reinterned maybe a month later. You know, in actual fact, they say that there's no psychological damage to what they put us through. But yet, with all the 4 of the victims of this torture were released from Long Kesh, only to be brought into psychiatric hospitals, released from the prison into the psychiatric hospital.
Now, Francie, you and the other hooded men, we're talking with Francie McGuigan, who's talking about the Internment Day rally, which was halted and stopped from going to the Belfast City Centre last week, and is also talking as one of the hooded men who was interned in 1971. You brought a court case, you and the other hooded men, to the European Court. Originally, the European Commission found that Britain was guilty of torture and inhuman treatment, and I remember the European Court modified that finding and said it was only inhuman treatment, and there were headlines in American papers and British papers, Britain not guilty of torture, even though they were found guilty. But you're appealing that now. Where is that court case, and what's the next thing that's going to happen with it?
We have, in the intervening years, this was 45 years ago, we've never let go of it. We've been fighting for justice for the 45 years. In the interim, we've discovered British government documents that they release every 30, 40 years, where actually, in some of the documents, this was discussed at Cabinet, and the word torture was used and accepted, and this was sanctioned by the British government at the highest level. We have also evidence that not only did they withhold information from the European Court, but they actually lied to the European Court. The doctors lied, and some of the officers lied. And we now are fairly firmly convinced that when the case goes back to Europe, on this occasion, Britain will be found guilty of torture. Well, I think on the first occasion, they didn't want the stigma of torture applied to the British government, who was one of the founders of the European Court of Human Rights. You know, to have one of the founders of it get the stigma of torture, you know, so we're going back now. We're fairly confident that we'll get the true result this time.
All right, Francie, we've been talking to Francie McGuigan. It's near 1 o'clock, 6 o'clock your time, Francie. We want to thank you. Yeah, like they say, you know, if somebody's willing to use torture, they're probably willing to lie about it and cover up and withhold documents. But we're hopeful. I want to thank you just for talking about what happened last Sunday, the anti-internment rally, and also what's happening with the hooded men. Now, we're going to go back. Thank you, Francie. We are going to go to a guest in a few minutes. Want to remind you, if you listen to Francie McGuigan's interview, if you're listening to the program on the archives, remember, at 1 o'clock or 6 o'clock Irish time, there will be another program listed on the WBAI archives. What's the name of that program?
It's called Science, Health, and Healing. It's the show after this. We've been extended because of the fundraiser to 2 hours, so it won't come under Radio Free Eireann, just the first hour. So if you want to continue listening on the archive, if you're listening right now, just go to the next show, Science, Health, and Healing, and you'll get to hear the rest of the show.
And that's only, of course, if you're not listening live right now, because if you're listening live via a computer, WBAI 99.org in Ireland, or you're listening in the New York area, you don't have to go to another show. We will just continue on. But if you listen by the archives, do that. Go to that other show. And remember, if you're listening live, the important thing today, 516-620-3602. That's 516-620-3602. Tell them you want the Liam Ryan video. Tell WBAI Radio Free Eireann has to stay on the air. In a few minutes, we're going to go to another guest. Eamon Sweeney is going to talk about the death of Bishop Edward Daly, about how paratroopers talking about that saying he literally had a gun up his sleeve on Bloody Sunday, and other events that are happening in Derry, including a Apprentice Boys rally today in Derry where there's no problem in getting to the city center for for those Orange Order people who are marching, the Apprentice Boys marching in the center of Derry. They don't have the problems that Francie McGuigan and the internment rally had in Belfast last Sunday.
And you're listening to Radio Free Eireann. It's almost 1 o'clock here in the city. We will be continuing on for another hour. We're going to play a song at 1 o'clock written by John Lennon called Sunday Bloody Sunday, and it references to the shooting in Derry all those years ago. When we come out of that, we'll be speaking to someone there about Bishop Daley, who died during the week. And if you go to Derry, you see the war mural up there of him trying to clear the way by holding up a white hanky, trying not to be shot himself and other people being shot. It's an iconic thing. And Bishop Daley was born in Balik in County Fermanagh, and my mother is from the Pedigo area, which is part in Fermanagh and Pedigo. And during the height of the Troubles, Bishop Daley used to go right by my mother's old homestead and go fly fishing at a place called Loch na Gig in Derry, and we would just look at him and never say anything to him because he was just trying to get away from the Troubles on the weekends and then head back to Derry. So there was a connection with him there, and we'll talk about the reaction of the mayor of Derry, who, because they're a member of the Democratic Unionist Party, are not allowed to go to Roman Catholic funerals or go into Roman Catholic Church. So she was unable to attend his funeral. And we'll be talking more about that. But if you want to hear this type of conversation, you have to call 516-620-3602. We have two